let us begin our descent into madness. 3 disturbing true Halloween horror stories. What the?
This happened Halloween of 2008. I was 14 years old and remember being especially excited for that year's Halloween. It fell on a Friday, meaning we could stay out later than usual. I was going to go trick-or-treating with my friend Matthew, after which we would go back to my house for a sleepover. I lived with my dad, who worked night shifts as a security guard. He was going to be gone pretty much from sundown to sunup, leaving Matthew and I to do our own thing.
Okay.
Matthew showed up at about 7 p.m., to which we quickly threw on some cheap costumes and headed out. Trick-or-treating in our neighborhood was always the worst. We lived in this foresty area where the houses were really spread out.
Oh no.
We probably walked a good quarter mile between each door. But at the same time, I think the homeowners kind of realized this, as they would typically hand out larger amounts of candy to make up for it. Of course, we'd see other trick-or-treaters as we walked between houses, but not as many as you'd think. There weren't all too many kids living in the area. We'd been trick-or-treating for about 2 hours, when I noticed someone following us. It was either a grown man or a really tall kid, I couldn't tell.
What?
He had a Michael Myers mask covering his face.
Uh-oh.
At first, I thought he was just trick-or-treating like everyone else, but he didn't have a bag to hold candy. And it was just him, it wasn't like he was with his kid or anything. I told Matthew about it, but he wanted to keep going.
Roro.
He reassured me that if the guy kept following us, we could go back. So we continued hitting houses. But the guy did continue to follow us. Something I picked up on pretty quick is that he wasn't even walking up to the house's front doors to get candy. He stayed behind us. Again, I told Matthew.
Behind?
This time I could tell he was a bit more on edge. Coming up was a shortcut through the woods, which led directly to my house. We took it, sprinting as soon as we entered the woods. We had no idea if we were followed, but either way, we immediately started locking all the doors and windows. I remember I was upstairs locking my bedroom window, when I heard yelling from back downstairs. It was Matthew.
Uh-oh.
I ran down to him. He was
Matthew,
standing
no!
next to the living room window. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't say anything. Instead, he pointed outside the window. I followed his finger, squinting as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. All I could see were trees. I looked back at Matthew. What? He told me the guy in the Michael Myers mask was standing out there.
Uh-oh.
Now I just thought he was trying to scare me. But when I looked back, I actually saw him. He was deep in the forest, halfway covered by one of the trees, just standing there motionless. I went to the kitchen to grab the phone. I called my dad as I walked back to the window. When he picked up, I told him that there was a stranger outside in a Michael Myers mask. Well, what is he doing? As I was looking out the window, I told him that he was just standing there, watching the house. Look, it's probably just some teenager trying to scare you. Just make sure all the doors are locked and ignore him. That was not the response I was hoping for, but I thought maybe he was right. Matthew and I went upstairs to my room and did our best to forget about it. But, of course, it was pretty much all we could think about. We started trying to come up with reasonable explanations. This was interrupted by the sound of glass shattering from downstairs. My heart started racing.
Oh no!
Neither of us knew what to do. The phone was back downstairs. We turned off the light and got into the closet. We shuffled to the way back, hiding behind hanging clothes, out of view. The next 5 minutes were completely silent. Then, footsteps entering the room. They started walking around.
It's him!
My
He's
heart was
inside the
racing.
house!
That's when the closet door slowly opened. A full minute had to have passed, of just nothing. Until, breaking the silence, was Matthew screaming. He was yanked out of the closet from right next to me. I stepped out. It was the guy in the Michael Myers mask, now with a knife. Matthew was being wrestled to the ground, but in the struggle, the guy dropped his knife. In a matter of seconds, Matthew was pinned down. I grabbed the knife and immediately stuck it in the back of the guy's thigh. He fell on his side, screaming in pain. Matthew got up and we started running downstairs. We went outside and sprinted to my neighbor's house. When we got there, we banged on the door until they answered. We explained our situation and they let us inside as they called the cops. To make a long story short, the cops didn't find the guy. He was missing from the house when they arrived.
But he got stabbed in the leg!
There was nothing to show for the encounter but a broken window and a missing kitchen knife. They looked for a blood trail,
what about the
but never
blood?
found one. I received no injuries, but Matthew wasn't as lucky. As he was struggling with the guy, he received a cut down his arm. Even today, I still think about that night.
No blood?
When I was 19, I lived at home with my parents. This happened on Halloween, and like every other year, my parents had me hand out candy to the kids that came by. I didn't mind. Our living room was right next to the front door, so I just put on a movie and get up whenever the doorbell rang. It was about 10 p.m. The doorbell rings were slowing down. By this point, both of my parents had gone to bed. I remember this almost perfectly. I was on the last scene of The Dark Knight when our home phone rang. I looked over to the left where the phone sat. Unknown caller. That's all it said.
Uh-oh, not unknown caller.
Now, literally just the other day, we had gotten a new set of phones. We were given a new number and hadn't given it out to anyone yet, so I doubted it was someone I knew. But I still thought I'd answer it just in case. I picked it up. Hello?
Hello?
All I could hear was heavy breathing, so I hung up. I figured they had the wrong number.
Hello?
Shortly after, the phone went off again. It said the same thing, unknown caller. I picked it up again. Who is this? This time, a male voice replied. I know where you live. I hung up again. I stopped to think for a second. I was starting to realize that it was probably just someone trying to prank call me. I mean, it was Halloween night, I can't even blame them. But at the same time, that's something you'd expect from a kid, or at the very most, a teenager. And from what it sounded like, whoever was on the other end of that line was much older than a teenager. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, 6 or 7 more phone calls came in. Finally, I picked up again. This time, I didn't say anything.
Bruh.
There were a few seconds of silence before the man started talking. I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly what was said, but it was something like how the guy was outside our house and that I needed to unlock the back door so he could get in. He said if we called the cops, he was going to kill everyone inside before they could arrive. After that, the line went dead. I was basically fully convinced by this point that this wasn't a prank call. I went to the kitchen, crawling on all fours to stay out of the view of any windows. I grabbed the largest knife I could find. With knife in hand, I crawled to my parents' room and shook awake my dad. I whispered to him that someone was outside near the back door.
Bruh.
He immediately got out of bed and grabbed his loaded revolver. As we crept through the house, I better explain the situation.
That was me.
I told him about all the phone calls. When we got to the back door, he unlocked it and stepped outside with no hesitation. He shot one bolt into the air, and right as he did, 3 men popped out from a set of bushes right up against the house and started sprinting away.
3 men!
They ran straight into the forest our house was backed up to. My dad chased them for a bit, but they were much faster than him. They disappeared into the trees. We never saw them again. We have no idea who they were. We called and told police, but there was nothing they could do. We still don't know how they got our phone number or what they wanted.
That's weird.
This happened last year on Halloween. I was 18 at the time, and my best friend Michael was 17. We both knew we were too old for trick-or-treating, but we also knew that handing out candy wouldn't be any fun. That's when Michael came up with an idea. There was this old abandoned house that was close to mine that we'd always said we'd explore at some point. We figured, what better night than Halloween? We waited until it got dark, and then waited even more until there were much less trick-or-treaters outside.
It's great when I hear stories like this. I'm sorry. When I hear stories like this, and I think about like I hear stories where like it was Halloween and instead of going trick or treating, I went to this abandoned place with my friends and blah blah blah. Or I went here, and it's like my mom never let me go out. I just think about what world is this where like people just like My mom never let me do any of this shit. I was never allowed to go out anywhere. I was never allowed to do anything. I was never allowed to hang out with friends and go to an abandoned place. Like, what the fuck? My mom would never let me do any of that shit. What?
We grabbed a couple flashlights and headed out. It took us a few minutes.
Even especially as a teenager, I wasn't allowed to like go out until after I was like, what the fuck?
And eventually we got to the house. Of course, since it was abandoned, it was a huge mess. Trash was scattered across the floor, windows were boarded up.
Are you crazy?
You get the picture. We walked up to the front door. I was half expecting it to be locked, but it opened. Inside was pitch black. We stepped inside. Our flashlights didn't light up much, so we did the best we could in looking around. The house had 2 floors. We explored everything on the bottom and didn't find anything interesting, so we went upstairs. Up there, we immediately saw 2 rooms. Michael went in the one on the right, and I went in the one on the left. I started exploring it, looking in drawers, in the closet, still nothing of interest.
Rooms?
I remember I was looking out the window when blood-curdling screams shot out from the other room. It was Michael. I ran over to the room he was in. Initially, I didn't see anything. That was until I put my flashlight in the back left corner. There was Michael, but he had an arm around his neck. Someone wearing all black with a Halloween mask had Michael in a chokehold. I could tell his face was turning red, so I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my flashlight as hard as I could at the person.
Bruh.
I managed to strike him in the side. He let go of Michael and shouted out in pain, holding his side. Now with no light, we ran downstairs. We managed to stumble out of the house in the dark.
Let's just be honest, bro.
When we got out,
you
we ran,
went out to an
but not
abandoned
before
place.
looking
What did you
back.
think was gonna happen?
Lit only by the moonlight, we saw 3 figures standing in the upstairs window looking down at us. All of them wearing that same Halloween mask.
What the fuck did you
We
think
turned
was
back
gonna
around
happen?
and ran even faster. We finally stopped when we made it back to my driveway. I bent over, breathing heavily. Neither of us knew what to think or do. We had no idea what we just came across. Later that night, Michael told me what happened when he entered that room. He got in there and started exploring it like every other room. After a while, he noticed something in the corner. He shined his flashlight at it and saw that it was a Halloween mask. He walked over to it, thinking it was propped up against the wall. It slightly moved, and that's when he realized it was a person. He screamed out, but was quickly put in a chokehold. That's when I came in. What disturbs me most is how Michael described being held. He said that whoever was in the mask had to have been using all their force on his neck. He wasn't just being restrained.
It's not
He genuinely
force.
couldn't breathe for the good
It's
20
called-
seconds or so that he was held there.
It's called ketamine.
Like I said before, we don't know what we came across. We don't know what those guys were doing, but we both agree it wasn't something we were supposed
It's
to
not
see.
force. It's called whatever that
I
drug
truly
is that
believe
makes
we were
you
almost
super
killed
strong.
that night.
What's that shit called?